Good morning, everybody. How are you today on this fine Friday? Today is Friday, May 30th. And what I like to do every Friday is read a little bit more from a book from our bookshelf. It's called The Difference Engine. So if you are just joining me for the first time, because I know I picked up a couple of new followers based on the audio presentation that I did a couple of days ago regarding the statement that RFK Jr. made on his Twitter page. Um, so if you're just joining me for the first time today, as a result of being a new follower, welcome. Thank you for joining and thank you for following. This is what I've been doing every Friday. This is the book. It's called The Difference Engine. And I think I may have found a copy of it online so that I could actually read it online instead of doing this throughout the whole hour-long reading instead of doing this. So hopefully, although some of you may prefer that, so hopefully that will work out. And if it doesn't, then I'll just go back to reading it from the book. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share this share this broadcast over to my Twitter page. I have some new followers on Twitter as a result of my Wednesday broadcast, which is great. And hopefully they'll be able to join, or if not, then they can watch it on the replay like many of you do. All right, so it looks like things are coming through on all the platforms. So for those of you who are brand new to this platform or this page, book of ours, and we have been creating video essays for at least 5 years, a little bit longer. And video essays are, well, you know what an essay is? An essay is basically a commentary based on lived experience or personal opinion. And then what we do is we would just add graphics and found video and some of our own stuff that we just have, that we've recorded throughout the years, and create sort of a dialogue around culture, around what's going on in the world right now. Some things are heavy, some things aren't so heavy. We were doing that for quite a few years, and I think the last one that I produced was called the New Model Sadism. So if you want to go and take a look at that, you can go to our YouTube channel and take a look at our New Model series. Sadism was the last one that I produced. The most watched video essay that we have is The New Constitution Living War Crimes, which came out on January 1st, 2023. And it's based on the information that I gleaned from Catherine Watt and Sasha Latypova, but mostly Catherine Watt. She's a paralegal who was researching the legitimacy and the constitutional legalities, I guess, around all of the COVID experiences, like lockdowns and, mandates and even vaccinations. And she went into a deep research with other people as well. There were other people involved in her research who she does give credit to. And I felt very inspired by her. And she has like zero social media presence, which I find endearing. So I produced a video essay. And one of my patrons actually helped me to come up with the title. And this is what I love about patrons and subscribers, is I get personal messages from them a lot. A lot of my communication with our patrons and our paid subscribers, or even our unpaid subscribers on Substack, a lot of it is, personal emails that go back and forth, checking in, saying hi, asking me, what do I think of this or what do I think of that? And so there's a lot that goes on, a lot of conversations that go on behind the scenes that aren't necessarily broadcasted on this page or made public. So when I was producing the new Constitution Living War Crimes, I was trying to come up with sort of a catchy title. I wanted something to really grab people, but I didn't want it to be too gimmicky. And it was one of my really creative patrons that helped me come up with that title. So that was nice. Before I continue with the reading and pick up where we left off last week, which it was getting really exciting, and I found the current character that has been brought into the story. Mallory, I believe is his name. I found him very endearing for some reason, and I found his relationship with his friend to be something that was very sweet and good. Just they have this really strong history, and it was definitely something that I appreciated that the writers brought into the story. So before I continue with the story, though, I want to take 10 minutes, maybe 15. I'll try to keep it down to 10 or 15 minutes. I want to talk about the difference between compassion and empathy. And I'm a storyteller. I'm a creative person, so I like to use, I like to create a story around my ideas. So there's something that has really weighed heavy on my heart lately. Is I wanted to express the difference between compassion and empathy. And the best way I can do that is to tell a story. So in the story, there are two characters. There's Courtney and Annie. So Courtney and Annie. Courtney and Annie have a long friendship that goes back a couple of decades. So they know each other pretty well. And again, this is just a story. This is to illustrate the difference between compassion and empathy and the dangers of social media and the dangers of sort of social media addiction and those types of things that we sometimes hear about. So Courtney and Annie have been friends for decades, and they're adults, and they're at brunch one day. Again, this is fiction, okay? And Courtney tells Annie, I'm having a problem with my shoe repair guy, the guy that I've been going to for years, that I've been paying money for years to have him shine my shoes or repair my shoes or repair my leather goods. And I'm having a problem with him because, first of all, he's overcharging me. He keeps raising his prices every year or so, and it's getting kind of ridiculous. And then the work that he is performing is really gone down. The quality of his craftsmanship has really gone down. He's, I come back and my shoes don't look as shiny as they should after especially paying all this money. And I went and had a bag repaired, and the seam ripped within a week. And so she's just having a conversation at brunch with her friend Annie, and Annie says, "Oh my goodness, I'm an empathetic person. The last thing in the world I want is for my old friend of, 10, 20, 30 years to be taken advantage of. I'm compassionate for you, and I feel a lot of empathy for you, but mostly I feel compassion. So let's come up with a solution." And so Annie pulls out her phone and types in, shoe repair place, and puts in the zip code. And lo and behold, there's quite a few shoe repair places that have very good ratings, and they're very affordable. And she says, well, look at this. You can choose to go to these new shoe repair places and check them out on your own. It's no skin off my back. I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but certainly what you're telling me is that you're being taken advantage of and you're not getting what you're what you're paying for. So I want you, as your friend who's full of compassion, this hurts my heart. So here's some solutions, and you can choose to, you know, go there or and accept my solutions or not, whatever works for you. Well, as they're talking more about the solutions, and Annie is like, "Well, look at this one. This one is, within walking distance from your house. Wow, their prices are a lot cheaper, and look at all the great reviews. You could just walk there. Maybe on your lunch break, you work from home, so maybe on your lunch break you can just head over there." And while Annie is coming up with the compassionate solutions for her friend Courtney, who is in distress over being taken advantage of and paying way too much money for shoe repair and not getting the quality that she deserves, Courtney is starting to have panic attacks about it. She is starting to feel the pressure. She's interpreting Annie's compassion as pressure. Like, oh, now I have to go take time, my personal time, and walk over to all these places and and possibly pick up a new a new shoe repair person, and I don't have a history with them. That's not what I'm used to. And yeah, the situation with the current person, I've had this relationship with him for 5 years at least, but yeah, sure, I'm unhappy, but it's something I'm used to. And oh, now you want me to like take time out of my personal time, possibly, gather all my things together. And suddenly Courtney feels overwhelmed and stressed out with having to actually physically do a thing in order to, um, you know, come to a solution for her current problem. And the current problem in this story, which is again fictional, the current problem is that somebody that she has been going to for years to repair her shoes and her bags and her leather goods and things like that has been overcharging her and not producing the quality of work that she should be getting for what she's paying. Courtney feels overwhelmed by Annie's compassion. Unfortunately, you know, compassion can also be interpreted as like dictating a solution, as opposed to just a friend saying, "Hey, look, here's a whole list of shoe repair people. I'm sorry if this is overwhelming you. You told me your problem. I'm here to help. I'm only here to help, but ultimately it's your decision. If you want to go with the new with some of my suggestions, that's up to you. It's your time, it's your money." Okay. And Annie keeps a polite distance from her recommendations to Courtney, who's feeling overwhelmed. Um, so that scenario that I just laid out for you is compassion. And there are compassionate people, believe it or not, for whatever reason, compassionate people don't have a lot of friends. They maybe have, one or two really good friends, but they don't have a lot of friends because compassion is often interpreted as, dictating a solution, or you should do it my way because this is the way I would do it. So you should do it the same way. And that's not at all what a compassionate person is about. A compassionate person hears a problem from a friend of theirs and then feels the emotional and physical pain in themselves for that problem and wants to come to a solution. It sounds a lot like empathy, doesn't it? Because we're told that empathy is, you know, people who can relate to your pain. So let's continue with the story. Annie takes the information, or Courtney takes the information that her compassionate friend Annie gave her and is so overwhelmed with it and is so freaked out by the solution that stops that they stop having brunch together. There's no more brunch, no more communication. Communication has all but come to a sputtering halt. I mean, it maybe one or two messages here and there, but really nothing. And no more brunch, especially. Instead, what Annie does is she wants to feel that people empathize with her. She doesn't really want solutions, I guess. Did I say Annie? I meant Courtney. Courtney's the one with the problem, being taken advantage of by her shoe repair person. So she goes to her Facebook page or her Instagram page or her Twitter page, whatever. She goes to social media and she says, "Can you believe that my shoe repair person has raised their prices every year for the last 5 years, and the work that they are doing has really deteriorated over these years. And I just went to drop off a pair of shoes to get them repaired and shined, and it cost me $75, and the shoes fell apart a week later. Can you believe this?" Social media, all of her connections, people that she doesn't have brunch with, people that she doesn't know in person, flood her account with empathetic responses. "Oh, I've totally been there. Can you believe that I had the same problem last year with my shoe repair person? And he was a total, he took advantage of everybody. I don't know what's going on with the economy. It must be because, small businesses are really hurting. So they have to raise their prices. Oh my gosh, and then suddenly Annie is flooded, or Courtney is flooded with, 10 comments, 20 comments, 30 comments, 50 comments, reshares, and all these empathetic people are flooding Courtney's pages, empathizing with her. Like they're really, truly, um, they get where she's coming from, and she's feeling better about herself. She's feeling so much more heard and understood, because all of these people, these hundreds of people out there, are going through the exact same thing. And that empathy is just reinventing itself over and over on Courtney's social media feeds. And she then, stops for lunch and feels really good. So she goes out and gets a coffee. She walks by the shoe repair place and she's like, everybody's on my side. I totally get it. Everybody gets what I'm going through. I totally understand what's going on now. I'm informed. Everybody understands me. And she feels really confident with these little dopamine hits of empathy that are coming through her social media feed. Meanwhile, her friend Annie, she doesn't even think about her. In fact, the very idea of Annie to Courtney, her friend of 10, 20, 30 years, makes Courtney feel nervous, makes Courtney feel anxious, like I don't want to talk to her. And why is that? Why doesn't Courtney want to hang out with Annie anymore when Annie is the only person that actually came up with a solution? Everybody else that Courtney is only quasi connected to on social media had all sorts of empathy and could totally relate to the problem, but nobody was coming up with solutions. Why is it that Courtney is preferring to live in that place of that feel-good place on social media where all of these people that are connecting with her that can relate to what she's saying, they've never had brunch with her. They've never gone out to have a hike with her. They have never cooked a meal together or spent any time together in any real way. They don't even text message. So why would Courtney prefer that over a very real connection with somebody that she's known for decades? And that's because social media has taught us that we're not allowed to feel bad. That if we feel bad about anything, or if anything is going to take effort, whether it's relationships or getting a better shoe repair guy, and stop being taken advantage of by, the world around you. Anytime there's a solution to that, it takes work. And social media basically says, "Oh, no, 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 you don't have to work at this. As long as you have a whole group of people that will identify with your pain and project empathy onto your social media feed, then Solutions don't matter. In fact, solutions and compassion is all about working towards a better life. And that's hard. And that stirs up really uncomfortable feelings. So every time Courtney goes into the shoe repair place and he's like, that'll be $150 to change your shoelaces. And she's like, okay. She feels bad because she knows that she can do better because Annie, her best friend, reminded her, you deserve better. And here's some solutions so that you can get better. That's compassion. When you want to see the people that you love experience life better. You want them to rise up. You want them to let go of the things that are hurting them. You want them to do better, be better. You know, life doesn't always have to be about, this immiseration. But Courtney can't deal with that because what that represents to her is work. And Courtney would rather feel good. She'd rather go to her nice, warm, cozy social media page and pig out on candy bars and smoke some pot and drink some cocktails and get that really good, warm, fuzzy feeling from all these swarms of people that are connected to her, that are telling her that they can identify with her pain. But there's no solution. Solutions are uncomfortable. Compassionate people often make people who are suffering make them feel uncomfortable because the end result is a solution. It's not just empathy. Empathy drives it, but that's not enough. You need a solution if you want a better life. So when Courtney and Annie meet and Courtney says, I have this problem, Annie's response is more than just, oh, I have that problem too. The end. No, Annie's response is, I've been where you are, so I can identify, so I do have the empathy. But second to that, and actually before that, first is I'm looking at you as a friend who I have loved and cherished for all these decades, and it hurts me to see you in pain. It hurts me physically and emotionally. So let's come up with a solution so that you're no longer in pain, because I don't want to see you in pain. I don't want to see you taken advantage of. You work very hard for your money. You shouldn't be handing it over to some guy who is taking advantage of you. And for some reason, that makes Courtney feel really uncomfortable because it involves something real. It involves work. It involves tearing yourself away from the warm, cozy dopamine hits of social media and actually getting out there face to face and maybe even confronting the shoe repairman who is overcharging her. Maybe it's a mistake, but by not communicating with him and not at least researching, other options, she's doing herself a disservice. But then instead of looking within and saying, I should really work on these issues, she's going to blame Annie for coming up with the solutions and say, you make me feel uncomfortable. You make me feel nervous. This is all your fault. You're the problem. You think you know everything. And all Annie was doing was showing legitimate, authentic compassion towards a friend. So I hope that I've illustrated the difference between compassion and empathy. Compassion is driven in real life. Compassion is not just, making a comment on someone's social media page. It's actually sending letters in the mail. It's maybe even text messaging. It's picking up the phone and calling. It's connecting with people in a very real way. To come up with solutions if there are issues. Compassion is, I have some very compassionate patrons, thank goodness, that felt the sting and pain of JP's unemployment from February to April. And they really showed their compassion and and did more than just say, "Oh, I've been there before and I feel really bad and good luck." They wrote a check, or or they picked up the phone, or they, sent some food. You know what I'm saying? Like that's compassion. Compassion is empathy-driven solutions. Empathy is just being able to identify with a person's pain, but without coming to any solutions or any outcomes at all. So we need to, recently somebody said on Twitter, what are some of the things that you miss, um, that you had, what are some of the things that have gone away as a result of, like, over the last 5 years, as the social media industry really takes over our life? And, a lot of people said empathy. And I was like, no, empathy is everywhere on social media. Empathy is designed to keep people from compassion. So I said compassion, defiance, and a sense of humor, because those are based in actual human, physical, interactive circumstances or situations. Compassion, defiance, and a sense of humor. So those are the things that have really kind of frittered away and disappeared over time. It feels like over the last 5 years, it's getting, you're seeing compassion and defiance and a sense of humor less and less, right? So I think I have hopefully I've illustrated clearly enough the difference between compassion and empathy. And again, I'm not here to tell people how to be or how to behave. That's not my job. My job is to simply creatively analyze what's going on in the world and sort of be an armchair, anthropologist about what's happening in the world, and how absurd it's become. Like, the world has become very absurd. So, absurdity levels that are unmatched at this point, right? So, speaking of the absurd, this is what the difference engine is about. So, let's move on into the reading of it. So, I have found the online book for free. So, I can read probably for about 30 minutes and then we'll sign off. Let me see if I can do this. Hopefully it works. Okay, so this is the book. Okay, excellent. And I made it really big so that people can read along. So before I continue reading, let me catch everybody up to date. There's a woman by the name of Sybil whose father was a sort of a revolutionary. He sounds like an anarchist. And one of his followers, one of his fans, but he died. Oh, I'm sorry. Sybil's father died. And one of his fans sought out Sybil, the daughter, to continue her father's work and, be a revolutionary. Now, in this particular story, everything is backwards. Like, we lost the Revolutionary War to, it's very muddied. All the people, for instance, that have all the power are all the people that don't have power in real life or who still have influence, don't have influence like in real life, but in the book. So everything's kind of turned around and inverted, okay, historically. So Sybil has been working with Mick Radley, who was the fan of her father. But Mick Radley died. Sybil was able to take off from, she actually witnessed his death. It was brutal, and she was able to escape. And so she's escaped. And so that's that story. And then last week I started reading about a new character who reconnected with an old friend of his, and they're working on these machines. Um, and there is some sort of competition going on. And the friend, Mallory, has basically placed a bet on his friend's machine, and everything he has, he 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 put everything he had into his friend. He placed the bet. And so he walked away from the competition in the race, and he was kind of having a panic attack, like, oh my God, I just bet everything that I own and everything that I am and everything that I have. I just bet everything on my friend, that he's going to win this competition. What have I done? And he's starting to have a little bit of regret, and he's panicking when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he is out a carriage of some sort, like, bursts into the crowd. There's a fight. He suddenly finds himself in the middle of a knife fight, and there's a box involved, like somebody wants to take the box from a woman. So Mallory grabs the box, and the guy's like got the blade to his throat, and it's just this, really, like, exciting, terrible thing that happened. So that's kind of where we are. And there's a big crowd of people all around. These are the same people that are also betting in this competition. And so they're anxious about the outcome as well. So there's this big sort of, big crowd of people there. So what I'll do is I'll just pick up from where I left off. So this is where he sees the knife. He had a brief glimpse of the stiletto fallen on the trampled turf, and a viciously narrow double-edged blade, the handle of black gutta percha. Then the man was upon him, bleeding from the mouth. There was no method whatever to the attack. Mallory assumed Shillingford's first stance and had at the villain's head. So Mallory he's been taught how to fight, and Shillingford's first stance is like a fighting position. Okay. So now the crowd, which had drawn back from the initial exchange and the flash of steel, closed around the two, the innermost ring, consisting of working men and the racecourse types who preyed on them. They were a burly, hooting lot, delighted to see a bit of claret split in unexpected circumstances. When Mallory took his man fair upon the chin with one of his best, they cheered, caught the fellow as he fell in their midst, and hurled him back square into the next blow. I can imagine that circus music was maybe playing in the background. So the dandy went down, the salmon silk of the cravat dashed with blood. I'll destroy you, he said from the ground, and at one of his teeth, the eye tooth by the look of it, had been bloodily shattered. Look out, someone shouted. Mallory turned at the cry. The red-haired woman stood behind him, her eyes demonic, something glinting in her hand. It seemed to be a glass vial, odd as that was. Her eyes darted downward, but Mallory stepped prudently between her and the long wooden box. There followed a moment's tense standoff while the tart seemed to weigh her alternatives. Then she rushed to the side of the stricken tout. I'll destroy you utterly, the tout repeated through bloodied lips. The woman helped him to his feet. The crowd jeered at him for a coward and empty braggart. Try it, Mallory suggested, shaking his fist. The tout's eyes met his in reptilian fury. So I feel like Mallory might have maybe a military background of some sort. Like he knows how to fight and fight to win. As the man leaned heavily on his woman, then the two of them were gone. Stumbling into the throng, Mallory snatched up the box triumphantly, turned and shoved his way through the laughing ring of men. One of them clapped him heartily on the back, and he made for the abandoned brougham, or the carriage. He pulled himself up and inside into worn velvet and leather. The noise of the crowd was dying down. The race was over. Someone had won. The gentlewoman sat slumped in the shabby seat, her breath stirring the veil. Mallory looked quickly about for possible attackers, but saw only the crowd, saw it all in a most curious way, as if the instant were frozen, daguerreotyped by some fabulous process that captured every least shade of the spectrum. Where is my chaperone? The woman asked in a quiet, distracted voice. And who might your chaperone be, madam? Mallory said, a bit dizzily. I don't think your friends were any proper sort for a lady, or were any proper sort of escort for a lady. Mallory was bleeding from the wound in his left thigh. It was seeping through his trouser leg. He sat heavily in the worn plush of the seat, pressed his palm against his wounded leg, and peered into the woman's veil. Elaborate ringlets, pale and seeming shot with gray, showed the sustained attentions of a gifted lady's maid, but the face seemed to possess a strange familiarity. Do I know you, madam? Mallory asked. There was no answer. May I escort you? He suggested. Do you have any proper friends at the Derby, madam? Someone to look after you? The royal enclosure, she murmured. You desire to go to the royal enclosure? The idea of troubling the royal family with this dazed madwoman was rather more than Mallory was willing to countenance. Then it struck him that it would be a very simple matter to find police there. And this was a police business of some kind, without a doubt. Honoring or humoring the unhappy woman would be his simplest course of action. Very well, ma'am, he said. He tucked the wooden box under one arm and offered her his other elbow. We shall proceed at once to the royal enclosure. If you would come with me, please. Mallory led her toward the stands through a torrent of people, limping a bit, and as they walked, she seemed to recover somewhat. Her gloved hand rested on his forearm as lightly as a cobweb. Mallory waited for a break in the hubbub. He found one at last beneath the wild pillars of the stands. May I introduce myself, ma'am? My name is Edward Mallory. I am a fellow of the Royal Society, a paleontologist. The Royal Society, the woman muttered absently, her veiled head nodding like a flower on a stalk. She seemed to murmur something further. I beg your pardon? The Royal Society. We have sucked the lifeblood from the mysteries of the universe. Mallory stared. The fundamental relations in the science of harmony, the woman continued, in a voice of deep gentility, great weariness, and profound calm, are susceptible to mechanical expression, allowing the composition of elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent. To be sure, Mallory soothed. I think, gentlemen, the woman whispered, that when you see certain productions of mine, you will not despair of me. In their own way, my marshaled regiments shall ably serve the rulers of the earth. And of what materials shall my regiments consist? Vast numbers. She had seized Mallory's arm with feverish intensity. We shall march in irresistible power to the sound of music. She turned her veiled face to him with a queer, sprightly earnestness. Is not this very mysterious? Certainly my troops must consist of numbers or they can have no existence at all. But then, what are these numbers? There is a riddle. Is this your box, ma'am? Mallory said, offering it to her, hoping to spark some return to sense. She looked at the box without apparent recognition. It was a handsome thing of polished rosewood, its corners bound in brass. It might have been a lady's glove box, but it was too stark and lacked elegance. The long lid was latched shut by a pair of tiny brass hooks. She reached out to stroke it with a gloved forefinger as if assuring herself of its physical existence. Something about it seemed to sting her into a dawning recognition of her own distress. Will you hold it for me, sir? She asked Mallory at last, her quiet voice trembling with a strange, piteous appeal. Will you hold it for me in safekeeping? Of course, Mallory said, touched despite himself. Of course I will hold it for you, as long as you like, madam. They worked their way slowly up the stands to the carpeted stairs that led to the royal enclosure. Mallory's legs smarted sharply, and his trouser was sticky with blood. He was dizzier than he felt he should have been from such a minor wound. Something about the woman's queer speech and odd demeanor had turned his head, or perhaps the dark thought occurred to him. There had been some sort of venom coating the tout's stiletto. He was sorry now that he had not snatched up the stiletto for a later analysis. Perhaps the madwoman, too, had been somehow narcotized. Likely he had foiled some dark plot of abduction. Below them, the track had been cleared for the coming gurney race. 5 massive gurneys and the tiny bauble-like Zephyr were taking their places. Mallory paused a moment, torn, contemplating the frail craft upon which his fortunes now so absurdly hinged. The woman took that moment to release his arm and hasten toward the whitewashed walls of the royal box. Mallory, surprised, hurried after her, limping. She paused for a moment beside a pair of guards at the door, plainclothes policemen, it seemed, very tall and fit. The woman brushed aside her veil with a swift gesture of habit, and Mallory caught his first proper glimpse of her face. She was Ada Byron, the daughter of the Prime Minister, Lady Ada Byron, the Queen of Engines. She slipped through the door beyond the guards without so much as a glance behind her on a single word of thanks. Mallory, lugging the rosewood box, hurried after her at once. "Wait," he cried, "your ladyship." "Just a moment," the larger policeman said, quite politely. He held up a beefy hand, looked Mallory up and down, noting the wooden case, the dampened trouser leg. Mustache, his mustached mouth quirked. "Are you a guest in the royal enclosure, sir?" "No," Mallory said, "but you must have seen Lady Ada step through here a moment ago. Something quite dreadful has happened to her. I'm afraid she's in some distress. I was able to be of some assistance." "Your name, sir?" barked the second policeman. "Edward Miller," Mallory blurted, a sudden chill of protective suspicion striking him at the last instant. "May I see your citizen card, Mr. Miller?" said the first policeman. "What's in that box you carry? May I look inside it, please?" Mallory swung the box away and took a step back. The policeman stared at him with a volatile mix of disdain and suspicion. There was a loud report from the track below. Steam whistled from a ruptured seam in the Italian gurney, fogging out across the stands like a geyser. There was some small panic in the stands. Mallory seized this opportunity to hobble off. The policeman, worried perhaps about the safety of their post, did not choose to pursue him. He hurried, limping, down the stands, losing himself as soon as possible amid the crowd. Some notion of self-preservation caused him to snatch his striped engineer's cap from behind his head and shove it in the pockets of his coat. He found a place in the stands, many yards from the royal enclosure. He balanced the brass-bound box across his knees. There was a trifling rip in his trouser leg, but the wound beneath it was still oozing. Mallory grimaced in confusion as he sat and pressed the palm of his hand against the aching wound. "Damn," said a man on the bench beside him, his voice thick with self-assurance and drink. "This false start will take the pressure down. Simple matter of specific heat. It means the biggest boiler wins, surely." "Well, which one's that then?" said the man's companion, perhaps his son. The man ruffled through a racing tip sheet. "Well, that'll be the Goliath, Lord Hansel's racer. Her sister craft won last year." Mallory looked down upon the hoof-beaten track. The driver of the Italian racer was being carried off on a stretcher, having been extricated with some difficulty from the cramped confines of his pilot's station. A column of dirty steam still rose from the rent in the Italian boiler. Racing attendants hitched a team of horses to the disabled hulk. Tall white gouts rose briskly from the stacks of the other racers. The crenellations of polished brass crowning the stack of the Goliath were especially impressive. It utterly dwarfed the slender, peculiarly delicate stack of Godwin's Zephyr, braced with guy wires, which repeated in cross section the teardrop formula of line streaming. A terrible business, opined the younger man. I do believe the burst took that poor foreigner's head clean off. Quite. Not a bit of it, said the older man. Fellow had a fancy helmet. He's not moving, sir. If the Italians can't compete properly in the technical arena, they've no business here, the older man said sternly. A roar of appreciation came from the crowd as the disabled steamer was hauled free by the laboring horses. We'll see some proper sport now, said the older man. Mallory, waiting tensely, found himself opening the rosewood box, his thumbs moving on the little brass catches as if by their own volition. The interior, lined with green baize, held a long stack of milky white cards. He plucked one free from the middle of the stack. It was an engine punch card, cut to a French specialty gauge and made of some bafflingly smooth artificial material. One corner bore the handwritten annotation number 154 in faint mauve ink. Mallory tucked the card carefully back into place and shut the box. A flag was waved and the gurneys were off. The Goliath and the French Vulcan lurched at once into the lead. The unaccustomed delay, the fatal delay, Mallory thought, his heart crushed within him, had cooled the tiny boiler of the Zephyr, leading no doubt to a vital loss of impetus. The Zephyr rolled in the wake of the greater machines, bumping half comically in their deep, gouged tracks. It could not seem to get a proper traction. Mallory did not find himself surprised. He was full of fatal resignation. Vulcan and Goliath began to jostle for position at the first turn. The three other gurneys fell into file behind them. Then Zephyr, quite absurdly, took the widest possible turn, far outside the tracks of the other craft. Master Second Degree Henry Chesterton, at the wheel of the tiny craft, seemed to have gone quite mad. Mallory watched with the numb calm of a ruined man. The Zephyr lurched into an impossible burst of speed. It slipped past the other gurneys with absurd, buttery ease, like a slimy pumpkin seed squeezed between the thumb and forefinger. At the half-mile turn, its velocity quite astonishing. It teetered visibly onto two wheels. At the final lap, it struck a slight rise, the entire vehicle becoming visibly airborne. The great driving wheels rebounded from earth with a gout of dust and a metallic screech. It was only at that moment that Mallory realized that the great crowd in the stands had fallen into deathly silence. So let's see where we are. Okay, got a few more minutes. Let's see if we can get to the next page easily enough. Okay, it looks like we did it. Not a peep rose from them as the Zephyr whizzed across the finish line. It slithered to a halt then, bumping violently across the gouged tracks left by the competition. A full 4 seconds passed before the stunned trackman managed to wave his flag. The other gurneys were still rounding a distant bend a full 100 yards behind. The crowd suddenly burst into astonished outcry. Not joy so much as utter disbelief, and even a queer sort of anger. Henry Chesterton stepped from the Zephyr. He tossed back a neck scarf, leaned at his ease against the shining hull of his craft, and watched with cool insolence as the other gurneys labored painfully across the finish line. By the time they arrived, they seemed to have aged centuries. They were, Mallory realized, relics. Mallory reached into his pocket. The blue slips of bedding paper were utterly safe. Their material nature had not changed in the slightest, but now these little blue slips infallibly signified the winning of 400 pounds. No, 500 pounds in all. 50 of that to be given to the utterly victorious Mr. Michael Godwin. Mallory heard a voice ring in his ears amid the growing tumult of the crowd. I'm rich, the voice remarked calmly. It was his own voice. He was rich. The image is a formal daguerreotype of the sort distributed by the British aristocracy among narrow circles of friendship and acquaintance. The photographer may have been Albert, the Prince Consort, a man whose much publicized interest in scientific matters had made him an apparently genuine intimate of Britain's radical elite. The dimensions of the room and the rich drapery of its backdrop strongly suggest the photographing salon that Prince Albert maintained at Windsor Palace. The women depicted are Lady Ada Byron and her companion and soi-distant chaperone, Lady Mary Somerville. Lady Somerville, the authoress of On the Connection of the Physical Sciences and the translator of Laplace's Celestial Mechanics, has the resigned look of a woman accustomed to the vagaries of her younger companion. Both women wear gilded sandals and white draperies, somewhat akin to a Greek toga, but strongly influenced by French neoclassicism. They are, in fact, the garments of female adepts of the Society of Light, the secret inner body and international propaganda arm of the Industrial Radical Party. The elderly Mrs. Somerville also wears a fillet of bronze marked with astronomical symbols, a covert symbol of the high post this femme savant occupies in the councils of European science. Lady Ada, her arms bare save for a signet ring on her right forefinger, places a laurel wreath about the brow of a marble bust of Isaac Newton. Despite the careful placement of the camera, the strange garb does not flatter Lady Ada, and her face shows stress. Lady Ada was 41 years old in late June 1855 when this daguerreotype was taken. She had recently lost a large sum of money at the Derby, though her gambling losses, common knowledge among her intimates, seemed to have covered the loss of even larger sums, most likely extorted from her. She is the queen of engines, the enchantress of number. Lord Babbage called her Little Da. She has no formal role in government, and the brief flowering of her mathematical genius is far behind her. But she is perhaps the foremost link between her father, the great orator of the Industrial Radical Party, and Charles Babbage, the party's gray eminence and foremost social theorist. Ada is the mother. Her thoughts are closed. And that ends the second iteration, because as I mentioned before, this book doesn't really have chapters. They go into iterations. So the first iteration was the introduction of Sybil and Mick Radley and who, and what their plans are. And then the second iteration was the introduction of Mallory and how he bet on his friend and he won the bet. And we've also learned about Lady Ada just now. So those first two iterations were probably setting us up for, more crossover between all of these different characters. I'm hoping that they'll eventually all sort of cross over and meet and have something to do with each other. Because as you heard me read, Mallory looked at Lady Ada and said, don't I know you? And it turns out that, this was before she revealed herself. And it turns out that she's a very well-known person because she's a lady. So let's see where we are. Yeah, we are just about at the 1 hour mark. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off now and start the third iteration next week. So let me go ahead and hide that and come back. So I hope everybody enjoyed the first 15 minutes or so of this broadcast where I talked about the difference between compassion and empathy and sort of gave a creative illustration or example of that between two friends who had known each other for a long time, and the one friend is more compassionate focused, meaning that and this is only my interpretation, that compassion is sort of empathy driven outcomes, whereas empathy is something you'll see all over social media. Lots of people will identify with your belief systems, your worldviews, your problems, your circumstances, your situations, but there's no definitive outcomes from those connections. So that's sort of this new world that we live in. And so it's difficult for compassionate people to navigate this new world because compassionate people want to see outcomes and results. They want to see, they want to move into, a better sphere of existence or a better life. And they feel it very seriously, this sort of constant compression, that an empathy driven existence doesn't allow you to elevate, doesn't allow you to move out of these circumstances that may be keeping you from reaching your full potential, or even just keeping you from being happy. So empathy driven people are looking for real connection. Personally, in our life, we removed ourselves off of just about every social media platform out there. I have a very limited footprint on Twitter. Obviously, I'm broadcasting on YouTube and Rumble, and this will go on to Substack when it's done broadcasting. It'll pop up on Substack. So obviously we're still there. But for instance, like there's a married couple in the town we live in that he's running for office, and as soon as that election is over, we're going to start talking about doing a rotating Sunday brunch in various people's houses in the small town we live in. That's something that his wife is a chef, and that's something that she's been wanting to do for a long time, and I'm interested in that. When we lived in San Francisco, we had a friend who was doing that, and it became wildly popular. So this doesn't have anything to do with social media or anything like that. This is just all real people getting together. Another friend has come and visited us in our small town twice now, or 3 times. So those actual connections, and then I don't know if I'm still there. I suddenly got taken down. I have no idea if I'm still recording. So she's planting gardens, pulling weeds, and even building sort of extensions from the onto the building itself. So she's doing real things. All right. It looks like I'm still broadcasting, so that's good. I don't know what happened. I got a weird message from our service about the broadcast. So I'm going to go ahead and end it here, and I'll see you next Friday for the continuation of the difference engine. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. Bye.
You can help us continue our work by becoming a patron at patreon.com/bookofhours, or leave us a one-time donation at paypal.me/bookofhours. Or you can use Cash App. Thank you.